Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. The debate over defense spending is often about the importance of the top-line numbers, but the efficient distribution of those dollars is also critically important. And part of achieving our efficiency is making sure that we're spending money in a way that aligns with our priorities and our positions, and that positions us to address current and emerging threats. You know, while states like Russia and Iran and North Korea and others threaten our interests, our military engagements today are increasingly low-intensity armed conflicts and cyber-based conflicts against both state actors and terrorist groups and other kinds of non-state actors. So let me ask this. Dr. Korb, can these modern threats and challenges be fully addressed by large spending increases on traditional military investments like troop levels, ships, planes, and nuclear weapons?
Now, I think you raise a great point because of the fact that the military services basically have an identity, and they always try and move ahead with that identity. And threats like cyber, for example, which are seen as non-traditional. For example, the special forces would not even have gotten the funding that they've gotten over the years unless Congress set up a separate assistant secretary for special operations forces, because they were getting lost in the budget. And so I think that's a thing that you have to be careful. As I pointed out in my testimony, you don't want to deal with threats from a bygone era. Secretary Gates said any Secretary of Defense who recommends to a president to send large land armies into the Middle East or Africa should have his head examined. So then you ought to say, well, why do you need a large land army? Those are the type of things that you need to do. And I think it's important to keep in mind, if you go back and you look at the history, in the 90s, the military fought against developing drones. It was the CIA drones that we used in Afghanistan after the attacks of 9/11. So yes, you have to, because they always want to stay with their traditional missions.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Dr. Korb. You know, it's easy to talk about spending more. The hard question is spending smarter and budgeting our defense resources based on 21st century threats in a way that enhances our military strength and lets our diplomacy complement our military strength. You know, efficient spending is also about eliminating waste. And it's in its annual report last April on wasteful and duplicative programs across the federal government, the GAO identified several areas where the Defense Department could achieve savings in areas like acquisition, contract management, and facilities maintenance. According to this report, from 2011 to 2016, GAO directed 152 recommendations to DoD to achieve savings, but 95 of these recommendations, that's about two-thirds, 63%, remain only partially addressed or not addressed at all. Dr. Korb, what are some of the major reforms that would be most effective toward eliminating wasteful spending?
Well, I think the first thing to take a look at, as I mentioned in my testimony, is what the Defense Business Board said is the buildup of the administrative part of the Department of Defense. The committee this year and last year in the NDAA, we told them to cut back. And it's not just civilian, but it's also, you know, the military staff, so I think is important. The other is, and I commend President Trump for doing this in terms of the F-35 contract. I hope that rather than just tweets, he really, you know, gets involved in, in dealing with it, because I think that is very, very, very important. These cost overruns, we haven't done as much as we should for the penalties. I think that, as I mentioned in my testimony, some of the things that Senator McCain recommended in his budget in terms of letting the Navy, who for years wanted to buy FA-18Es and Fs rather than the F-35s because they felt that they could deal with the threats that they would face. The littoral combat ship, when it turned out to be a disaster, nobody did anything, about it. So yes, I think there are things that, we can do. And I have written this several times, unless you get a Deputy Secretary of Defense like a David Packard or Charles Duncan, who came from Coca-Cola, or Don Atwood from General Motors, to do these things, it's going to be very, very hard. Defense, they haven't even passed an audit yet, okay? I mean, we keep waiting and waiting, and you keep saying, well, when is it going to happen? Well, you've got to have it.
Well, I appreciate that. I know there are always pushbacks on audits, and they cost time and money, but there's a lot of cost to not doing an audit as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.